Ethan Walker had not been back in Maple Ridge for more than 20 minutes when he saw her. He was still lifting boxes out of the truck, his 5-year-old son half asleep in the passenger seat. And there she was, standing across the street with a dish of lasagna, like she had been waiting for him all along. He did not know her name yet. He did not know what she had survived. All he knew was that she looked at him and said, "You don't have to do this alone." And something inside him cracked wide open. Her name was Lena Brooks, and she lived in the house directly across the street. Ethan learned this within the first 5 minutes of standing on his new front porch, holding a warm dish of lasagna he had not asked for, watching his son Cameron press his face against the truck window to stare at the woman who had just appeared out of nowhere. She told him her name the way people in small towns do, casually, like it was something he should have already known. Then she pointed to the house behind her and said she had lived there for 6 years, that she worked as a therapist at the clinic on Pine Street, and that the previous owner of Ethan's house had been a quiet old man who kept to himself. Ethan thanked her and carried the lasagna inside. The house smelled like dust and something faintly sour, like old wood left too long without air. The walls had cracks running through the plaster, and the kitchen faucet dripped a slow, steady rhythm that echoed through the empty rooms. Cameron stood in the hallway clutching a stuffed bear, looking up at his father with the kind of trust that made Ethan's chest tighten. The boy had never had a permanent home. They had bounced between a base apartment, then his ex-wife's mother's place during the divorce, then a motel outside Albany for 3 weeks while Ethan scraped together enough money to close on this house. Cameron was 5 years old, and this was the first time he would have his own bedroom. Ethan had served 2 tours overseas before coming back to a marriage that no longer recognized him. His wife, ex-wife now, had told him plainly that the man who came home was not the man she married. She was not wrong. He had lost weight, lost sleep, lost the ability to sit in a quiet room without scanning every doorway. The divorce finalized 7 months before the move, and by then Ethan had already stopped fighting for anything except custody. He got shared custody every other weekend and holidays, which felt like losing even when the judge called it fair. Maple Ridge was the town where he had grown up, the only place he could afford on a veteran's pension while he looked for steady work. Coming back here felt less like a homecoming and more like a retreat. The first week was all labor. Ethan patched the porch railing. He replaced the leaking faucet. He painted Cameron's room a pale blue because the boy had asked for sky color. Every evening, he sat on the front steps after Cameron fell asleep, staring at the street and wondering if he had made the right call. And every evening, Lena's kitchen light was on across the road, a warm square of yellow in the dark. She waved once from her window. He lifted his hand back. That was all. But Lena did not stop at lasagna. On the 3rd morning, she appeared at his door with 2 cups of coffee and a name. Ruth, the woman who ran the farmer's market on Saturdays, and told Ethan that if he needed fresh produce on a budget, Ruth gave discounts to veterans. Ethan had not told Lena he was a veteran. She must have heard it somewhere, from someone, because that was how Maple Ridge worked. Everyone knew everything before you had a chance to say it yourself. By the end of the 2nd week, Lena had introduced him to half the town, without making it feel like charity. She brought him to the diner on Main Street, where a man named Doug gave Cameron free pancakes and called him Little Soldier. She mentioned that the hardware store on Oak Avenue had a weekend discount, and that the owner, Pete, was looking for part-time help. She told Ethan about the community board at the library, where people posted odd jobs: fence repairs, lawn work, furniture assembly, things a man with military training and strong hands could do easily. Every suggestion was delivered the same way. Matter of fact. No pity. No performance. What unsettled Ethan was not the help itself, but the way Lena looked at him when she offered it. She did not look at him like he was broken. She did not look at him like a project. She looked at him like she understood something about starting over that most people only pretended to understand. There was a steadiness in her that felt earned, not inherited, like she had built it from scratch after something had knocked it down. He noticed small things, the way she sometimes glanced at her phone and then set it face down on the table, quickly, as if the screen had shown her something she did not want to see. The way she always locked her front door twice before stepping off the porch. He filed these details away without asking about them. Cameron took to Lena faster than Ethan expected. The boy was shy with most adults, often hiding behind Ethan's leg when strangers spoke to him. But with Lena, something was different. She crouched down to his level when she talked to him. She asked him questions about his stuffed bear, its name, its favorite food, whether it snored at night, and listened to his answers with the kind of seriousness that children recognize as real. One afternoon, Cameron drew a picture of 3 stick figures standing in front of a blue house. He pointed to the tallest one and said, "That's Dad." Then the medium one, "That's Lena." Then the smallest, "That's me." Ethan stared at the picture for a long time after Cameron went to bed that night. A month in, and Ethan could no longer pretend this was just neighborly kindness. He and Lena had fallen into a rhythm that felt too deliberate to be accidental. She helped him sand the kitchen cabinets on a Saturday morning. He fixed the loose step on her back porch that Sunday. They drove together to pick Cameron up from his first day of kindergarten orientation. And when the boy ran out of the building holding a crayon drawing of a fire truck, he showed it to both of them equally, as if they were a unit. At the farmer's market the following weekend, Ruth looked at the 3 of them and smiled in a way that said she had already made up her mind about what this was. Ethan felt it. He felt it when Lena brushed past him in the narrow hallway of his house and her shoulder touched his arm. He felt it when she laughed at something Cameron said and looked at Ethan to share the moment, her eyes catching his for half a second longer than necessary. He felt it like a low hum beneath every interaction, growing louder each day. And it terrified him, because the last time he had let himself feel this way about someone, it had ended in paperwork and silence and a 5-year-old asking why Daddy lived in a different house now. One evening, after Cameron was asleep, and Lena was sitting on his porch drinking the last of a bottle of wine they had split, she said something that landed harder than she probably intended. She told him she could see him pulling back, that every time they got close to something honest, he found a reason to stand up, check on Cameron, change the subject. Ethan stared at the dark street ahead and said nothing for a while. Then he told her the truth. He said he did not trust himself to do this right, that his track record with people who mattered was not good, that Cameron was the only thing he could not afford to get wrong, and everything else, including whatever was building between them, felt like a risk he had no right to take. Lena set her glass down on the porch railing. She looked at him directly and said that she was not asking him for a guarantee. She was asking him whether he was willing to try. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, just honestly. Ethan sat with the question like it weighed something physical. He thought about the house behind him, half repaired and full of boxes he still had not unpacked. He thought about Cameron's drawing of 3 stick figures. He thought about the way Lena locked her door twice every night, as if she too knew what it felt like to not be safe. And before he could overthink it, before the old machinery of doubt could kick in and shut him down, he said yes. Saying yes turned out to be the easy part. Living inside that yes was something else entirely. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself doing something he recognized from the military, scanning for threats. Not physical ones this time, but emotional. He watched for the moment Lena would see him clearly and decide he was not worth the trouble. He watched for the moment Cameron would get too attached and then get hurt. He watched for the moment the town would start talking, and he knew it was only a matter of time, because Maple Ridge did not let anything stay private for long. It started at the diner. Doug refilled Ethan's coffee one morning and asked casually whether Lena was the one helping him settle in. The way he said it carried a weight that had nothing to do with coffee. At the hardware store, Pete mentioned that Lena was a good woman and that she deserved someone steady. The implication sat between them like a stone on the counter. Even Ruth at the farmer's market tilted her head one Saturday and told Ethan he looked happier than the first time she had met him, then glanced at Lena with a smile that made the observation feel like a verdict. Nobody said anything cruel. Nobody needed to. The awareness that his life was being observed and narrated by people he barely knew was enough to make Ethan's skin tighten. He began pulling back in small ways he hoped Lena would not notice. He stopped suggesting they eat dinner together during the week. He kept their conversations shorter, more surface level. When Cameron asked if Lena could come to his first real day of kindergarten, Ethan said maybe, which the boy understood correctly as no. At night, lying in bed with the ceiling fan clicking above him, Ethan argued with himself. One voice said he was protecting his son. Another voice said he was protecting himself and calling it parenting. He thought about his ex-wife's words during the divorce, that he had a gift for being physically present and emotionally absent at the same time. He had hated her for saying it. He hated himself more for knowing she was right. Lena noticed. Of course she noticed. She was a therapist. And more than that, she was someone who had spent years learning to read the distance people put between themselves and the things they wanted. She did not confront him immediately. Instead, she gave him exactly the space he seemed to be asking for, and the absence of her felt louder than her presence ever had. 3 days passed without her knocking on his door. Cameron asked about her twice. Ethan told him Lena was busy with work, which was probably true, but felt like a lie anyway. On a Friday evening, Lena texted him a single line. There was a cabin her friend owned on the lake about 40 minutes north, and it was empty this weekend. She said Cameron could come or not. She said it was just an invitation, not a test. Ethan read the message 3 times. Then he called his ex-wife and asked if she could take Cameron for the weekend. It was not his scheduled time to hand him over, but she agreed without asking why. He dropped Cameron off Saturday morning, drove home, and sat in his truck for 10 minutes before texting Lena back. He told her he would drive. The cabin was small and plain, set back from the water behind a row of birch trees. They arrived in the late afternoon and spent the first hour doing nothing important, carrying bags inside, opening windows, figuring out the old stove. The quiet between them was not comfortable, and not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that exists when 2 people know a conversation is coming, and neither wants to start it. They ate sandwiches on the dock as the sun dropped behind the trees, and then Lena set her plate aside and looked at him in that way she had, direct and patient, like she could wait as long as it took. Ethan spoke first. He told her that he had been pulling away and that he knew she knew. He said the town was watching them, and it made him feel like every move he made was being graded. He said he was terrified of failing again, not just with her, but with Cameron, with the house, with the entire idea that he could build a life that held together. He said that in the military, the rules were clear. You followed orders. You completed the mission. You came home, or you did not. But here, in this civilian life, with its soft edges and open choices, He did not know what the mission was anymore. He did not know what good enough looked like. And every time he got close to something that felt like happiness, a part of him started counting down to the moment it would be taken away. Lena listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she did not try to fix what he had said or reframe it with clinical language. Instead, she told him something about herself that she had never said out loud to anyone in Maple Ridge. She said that before she moved to this town, she had been in a relationship for almost 4 years with a man who controlled every corner of her life. He chose her clothes. He monitored her phone. He convinced her, slowly and methodically, that she was too broken to survive without him. When she finally left, she drove 8 hours straight, with nothing but a bag in the back seat, and moved into the house across from where Ethan now lived. She rebuilt everything from the ground up: her career, her friendships, her ability to sleep through the night without checking the locks. And she told Ethan, clearly, that she did not do all of that to become someone's rest stop. She would not be the woman who helped a man heal just to watch him walk away once he felt better. The honesty of it hit Ethan like cold water. He understood what she was saying. She was not issuing a threat. She was naming the thing she could not survive again. And in that naming, she was asking him to decide, not with promises or grand gestures, but with the only currency that mattered between two people who had both been wrecked. She was asking him to show up, not perfectly, not without fear, just consistently, honestly, with both hands open. Ethan looked at the lake and then back at her. He told her he could not promise he would not make mistakes, but he could promise that he would not disappear, that when things got hard, he would stay in the room. Lena held his gaze for a long moment, and then she nodded. Once, like a contract had just been signed without paper. They came back from the cabin different, not louder, not more visible, but steadier. Lena started spending evenings at Ethan's house after Cameron went to bed. They cooked together. They argued over small things: how to organize the kitchen, whether the porch needed new boards or just sanding. And the arguments felt healthy, ordinary, like proof that this was real and not a performance. Cameron began asking for Lena at breakfast, and Ethan stopped flinching at the sound of it. For the first time since the divorce, the house on Maple Ridge felt like what he had wanted it to be. It felt like a home. Then Marcus showed up. It was a Tuesday evening, and Ethan was inside helping Cameron with a puzzle when he heard a car door slam across the street. He looked out the window and saw a black sedan parked in front of Lena's house, a tall man standing on her porch with his hands in his pockets. Lena opened the door, and even from across the road, Ethan could see her body change. Her shoulders pulled in, her posture shrank, as if something inside her was trying to take up less space. The man talked. Lena shook her head. The man kept talking. After a few minutes, Lena stepped back inside and closed the door, and the man stood on the porch a moment longer before returning to his car and driving away. Lena did not mention it that night. Ethan did not ask. But the next morning, he saw her through her kitchen window, sitting at the table with her phone in her hand, staring at it. The way she used to. Face down, then picked up, then face down again. He texted her and asked if she was okay. She replied with a single word: fine. He knew what that word meant coming from someone who used language for a living. It meant the opposite. 2 days later, Ethan received a phone call that added a second fracture to an already fragile week. A hospital system in Albany was offering him a full-time facilities maintenance position. Steady hours, benefits, a salary nearly double what he was piecing together from odd jobs around town. The HR representative said they needed an answer within 10 days. Ethan sat on his back porch with the phone in his hand and felt the ground shift beneath him. Albany was 3 hours away. Taking the job would mean pulling Cameron out of kindergarten, leaving the house he had just started to fix, and putting distance between himself and the only person who had made him believe that staying in one place was worth it. He told Lena about the offer that evening, and he watched her face carefully as he said it. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She asked him practical questions: what the salary was, what the hours looked like, whether the position included housing. And then she said something that stayed with him long after the conversation ended. She said she would not be the reason he turned down a better life for his son, and she would not be the reason he accepted a worse one. The decision had to be his, made for the right reasons, and she would respect whatever he chose. It was the most generous thing anyone had ever said to him, and it made the choice infinitely harder. Marcus came back on a Saturday afternoon. This time, Ethan was on his own porch when the black sedan pulled up. This time, he watched everything. Marcus got out of the car with the slow confidence of a man who believed he still owned something in that house. He knocked on Lena's door, and when she opened it, he did not wait for an invitation. He stepped forward, close enough that Lena had to step back, and Ethan saw him reach for her hand. Not aggressively, gently, almost tenderly, which made it worse, because Ethan recognized the gesture for what it was. It was possession dressed as affection. Lena pulled her hand away, but Marcus kept talking, kept leaning in, kept occupying space that was not his. Ethan's body responded before his mind could catch up. He was off the porch and halfway across the street before he registered that he was moving. Every instinct he had built in 2 combat tours was firing at once. Protect, intervene, neutralize the threat. But somewhere between his yard and hers, a different voice broke through. It was Lena's voice from the cabin, telling him that she had rebuilt her life by herself, that she had earned her own strength, that she did not need to be rescued. And he understood, in that frozen mid-stride moment, that if he stormed onto that porch and made this about himself, about his anger, his need to protect, his fear of losing her, he would be doing exactly what Marcus had always done. He would be making her smaller to make himself feel necessary. So he stopped. He stood at the edge of her yard, visible but not advancing, and he waited. Marcus noticed him. The man turned and looked at Ethan with an expression that was half amusement, half challenge. He said something Ethan could not hear, directed at Lena, but meant for him, and then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that dared you to react, that fed on your reaction, that won either way. Ethan did not move. He did not speak. He stood there like a wall, present and immovable, and let Lena handle what was hers to handle. But later that night, after Marcus finally left, and Lena came across the street with red eyes and steady hands, Ethan felt the weight of everything pressing down at once. Marcus was not going away. The Albany job was ticking like a clock. Cameron had started asking why Daddy looked worried all the time, and the fragile thing Ethan and Lena had built together, this careful, honest, showing up everyday thing, suddenly felt like it could shatter from any direction. He sat on the floor of Cameron's room after the boy fell asleep, listening to his son breathe, and thought, this is the moment where everything either holds or it doesn't. And he did not know which one it would be. Marcus came back a third time. It was a Wednesday, late afternoon, and Cameron was at Ethan's ex-wife's place for the midweek visit they had recently agreed on. Ethan was in his garage sorting tools when the black sedan rolled down the street and stopped in front of Lena's house. This time, Marcus did not knock. He sat in the car with the engine running, and Ethan could see him through the windshield, phone to his ear, watching Lena's front door like a man waiting for something to wear down. Lena must have seen the car from inside, because she came out before Marcus had the chance to get comfortable. She walked down her porch steps and stopped at the edge of her yard. Arms crossed, feet planted. Even from across the street, Ethan could see that something had shifted in her. The woman who had shrunk in her doorway during Marcus's first visit was not the woman standing on the grass now. This version of Lena looked like someone who had spent the last few days remembering exactly who she had become after she left this man, and she was not willing to let him take any of it back. Marcus stepped out of the car slowly, smiling, talking before his second foot hit the pavement. Ethan could hear fragments, words like, "just want to talk," and "you're overreacting," and "I drove all this way." The language of a man who had learned that persistence could be disguised as devotion. Lena let him finish. Then she spoke, and her voice carried clearly across the quiet street. She told Marcus that if he came to her house again, she would call the police. She told him there was no conversation left to have. She told him that the woman he was looking for did not live here anymore and had not lived anywhere for a long time. Marcus's smile faded. He took a step forward, and Lena held up her phone, screen facing him, thumb hovering over the keypad, and said 3 numbers out loud. Marcus stopped. Ethan had crossed the street by then, not running, not charging, just walking with the kind of deliberate calm he had learned in places where panic could get people killed. He stopped beside Lena, not in front of her, not between her and Marcus, but next to her, and said nothing. He did not need to say anything. His presence was not a rescue. It was a statement. It said, "She is not alone, and you are outnumbered, and this is finished." Marcus looked at Ethan, then at Lena, then at the phone still raised in her hand. He stood there for a long moment, the kind of moment where a man calculates whether his pride is worth more than the consequences. Then he got back in his car and drove away. Lena did not lower the phone until the sedan turned the corner and disappeared. They stood in her yard for a while after that, not speaking. Lena's hands were shaking, but her face was still. Ethan reached over and took her hand, and she let him, and they stayed like that until her breathing evened out. Then she looked at him and said thank you, not for protecting her, but for letting her protect herself. Ethan understood the difference. It was the most important thing he had learned since coming home. The Albany deadline came 3 days later. Ethan sat at his kitchen table with the offer letter spread out in front of him and a cup of coffee going cold beside it. The numbers were good. The benefits were better. On paper, it was the responsible choice, the kind of decision a good father would make to secure his child's future. But Ethan had spent enough time making decisions on paper to know that paper did not account for the things that actually held a life together. Albany meant pulling Cameron away from the first school he had ever liked, the first bedroom he had ever called his own, the first place where he had drawn a picture of his family and included someone outside of it. Albany meant 3 hours of distance from the woman who had taught Ethan that showing up was not a grand gesture, but a daily practice. And Albany meant running again, not from danger this time, but from the slow, unglamorous work of building something permanent in a place that knew his name. He called the HR representative that morning and turned down the offer. The woman on the phone sounded surprised and asked if he was sure. Ethan said he was. After he hung up, he sat with the silence for a few minutes, waiting for the regret to arrive. It did not come. Instead, what came was a clarity he had not felt since before the military, before the marriage, before everything that had taught him to distrust his own choices. He knew what he wanted. He wanted this house, this street, this town. He wanted Cameron's drawings on the refrigerator, and Lena's voice in the kitchen, and the sound of the screen door slamming shut on summer evenings. He wanted the small life, and for the first time, wanting something small did not feel like failure. The following week, he applied for a maintenance position at the regional hospital 20 minutes outside Maple Ridge. The pay was less than Albany, but more than the odd jobs, and the hours were steady. Early mornings, home by mid-afternoon. Weekends free. He got the call back within 5 days. When he told Lena, she did not say she was proud of him, or that he had made the right choice. She said she was glad, simply and honestly, and that was enough. Things moved forward in the way real things do, without ceremony, without a single defining moment, but through the accumulation of ordinary days that began to feel extraordinary, only in hindsight. Lena started leaving a toothbrush at Ethan's house, then a change of clothes, then a shelf of books in the living room. Cameron stopped treating her presence as a visit and started treating it as a fact. One morning, the boy came downstairs for breakfast, saw Lena making eggs at the stove, and sat down at the table without comment, as if this had always been his life. Ethan watched from the doorway and felt something unlock in his chest that he had not known was sealed. They argued sometimes, about money, about parenting, about whether Ethan was taking on too many extra shifts at the hospital. The arguments were not quiet or polite, but they were honest, and they always ended in the same place, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, talking it through until the anger cooled and the understanding took its place. Lena once told him that conflict was not the enemy of a relationship. Avoidance was. Ethan believed her, because she lived it. By the time autumn settled over Maple Ridge, the house looked different. The cracks in the plaster were filled. The porch had new boards. Cameron's pale blue room now had a bookshelf Ethan had built himself, stocked with books Lena brought home from the library every Friday. The kitchen faucet that once dripped in the silence no longer made a sound, and in its place was the noise of something better, conversations and footsteps, and the clatter of plates being set for 3. Cameron's relationship with his mother steadied as well. Ethan had worked to make the transitions easier, packing the boy's bag without resentment, speaking about his ex-wife without bitterness, making sure Cameron understood that having 2 homes did not mean belonging to neither. It was not effortless. There were nights when Cameron came back quiet and withdrawn, and Ethan had to resist the urge to interrogate or fix. Instead, he did what Lena had taught him by example. He sat with his son. He let the boy talk when he was ready. He showed up without demanding anything in return. On a Sunday morning in late October, Ethan drove to the next town over and bought a ring. It was not expensive. It was a simple gold band with a small stone, chosen not for its size, but because the woman behind the counter at the antique shop said it had been part of a set that belonged to a couple married for 52 years. Ethan liked that. He liked the idea that the ring already knew how to last. He did not plan the proposal. He did not rehearse words or arrange a setting. It happened on a Thursday evening after dinner, while Lena was washing dishes and Cameron was drawing at the kitchen table. Ethan stood in the doorway watching them, Lena with her sleeves rolled up, Cameron humming a song he had learned at school, and he felt the fullness of it, the ordinary, irreplaceable weight of a life that was finally his. He walked over to Lena, took her wet hands in his, and asked her to marry him. She looked at him, then at Cameron, then back at Ethan, and said yes with the same steadiness she brought to everything. Not dramatic, not tearful, just certain. They married in the backyard on a Saturday in early December, when the air was cold enough to see your breath, but not cold enough to go inside. Ruth from the farmer's market brought flowers. Doug from the diner brought a cake he swore he had baked himself, though no one believed him. Pete from the hardware store stood in the back row and clapped louder than anyone. Cameron stood next to his father in a clip-on tie and held the ring on a small pillow, and when the moment came, he handed it over with the gravity of someone who understood, even at 5 years old, that this was important. Lena moved in officially that same week, though by then it was mostly a matter of carrying the last of her boxes across the street. The house that Ethan had once seen as a symbol of retreat, a place he ended up because he could not afford anything better, had become something else entirely. It was not perfect. The heating was unreliable. The floorboards still creaked in the hallway. The yard needed work that would probably never be finished. But every room held evidence of the life they were building. Cameron's drawings taped to the walls, Lena's books on the shelves, Ethan's tools lined up in the garage beside a pair of small rain boots and a stuffed bear that had seen better days. Home, Ethan had learned, was not a place you arrived at. It was a place you built by choosing to stay. Not once, in some grand declaration, but every single day.